What if a single forgotten diary could rewrite everything we know about the Napoleonic Wars? And what if Miss Marple was the only one who could uncover a truth buried for 2 centuries? Welcome to the series of Driftaway Tales. If you are interested in fictional historical tales, then please like this video and subscribe this channel to show your support. Chapter 1. The Soldier's Trunk arrives in St. Mary Mead. It was a gentle, pale morning in St. Mary Mead, the kind that draped the village in quiet softness. Miss Marple sat by her window, mending a small tear in her tablecloth, when she heard the slow crunch of footsteps outside. Before she could stand, a knock echoed through her cottage, firm, deliberate, strangely urgent. When she opened the door, the postman stood there, slightly breathless. "Morning, Miss Marple. A parcel for you, or rather, a trunk." Behind him lay a small wooden trunk, worn by time, its corners chipped, brass hinges green with age. The initials CW were faintly carved on the lid. "For me?" Miss Marple asked, genuinely puzzled. She rarely received anything more exciting than garden catalogues. "Yes, ma'am. Sent by a Mr. Edmund Whitlock of Portsmouth. Says it belonged to your distant cousin, Captain Charles Whitlock. Napoleonic Wars, it seems." For a moment, something stirred in Miss Marple's chest, curiosity and something softer, almost like remembrance. She had heard that name whispered long ago in family tales of bravery and tragedy. She thanked the postman and carefully brought the trunk into her sitting room. As her hands brushed the old wood, a faint shiver passed through her fingertips, not fear, but the quiet tremble of discovering something long forgotten. She sat down, heart steady yet alert. "What secrets have you carried all these years, Captain Whitlock?" she whispered, and the trunk, silent for 2 centuries, seemed to wait patiently for her to begin. The trunk opened with a soft, metallic sigh, as if relieved to finally tell its story. Inside, the scent of age-dust pine incrose into the room like a breath released from another era. At the top lay a neatly folded blue British uniform jacket, its brass buttons dulled. Beneath it rested a torn battlefield map, its edges burned slightly as if saved from a fire. A leather-bound diary, the spine cracked, sat beside a small sealed envelope bearing words in elegant handwriting, to be opened only by a truth-seeker. Miss Marple touched the envelope lightly. "Goodness," she murmured, "that sounds rather dramatic." But her attention lingered longer on the diary. She opened it gently. Faded ink, steady handwriting, the markings of a disciplined officer. The first entry read, "November 1805, on the eve of Austerlitz. Something weighs on my conscience tonight. Something I must hide until the right eyes find it." Miss Marple's breath caught slightly. A diary written before the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleon's great victory. But why would a British captain write with such heaviness? As she ran her finger down the page, she noticed something odd. Tiny pencil marks in the margins, small circles, slashes, and dots. They did not match the handwriting. They looked coded. The quiet room suddenly felt alive, as if history itself leaned closer. Before she could explore further, a shadow fell across her window. A man stood outside, tall, coat collar raised, watching. But when Miss Marple blinked, he turned away quickly and walked off down the lane. A stranger in St. Mary Mead was rare. One watching her house was rarer still. Miss Marple straightened her back, sensing the first tremor of mystery. It seems Captain Whitlock's secrets have not been forgotten. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple prepared tea, though her mind remained fixed on the diary. She sat beside the warm glow of her fireplace, turned another page, and found more coded markings, some faint, some deeply pressed into the paper. She leaned in closer. These are not ordinary notes. Someone was sending messages, or hiding them. Her intuition nudged her toward one person who might assist her. Professor Arthur Whitcomb, a historian specializing in European military conflicts, and a friend of St. Mary Mead's Small Reading Society. She wrapped the diary in a soft cloth, slipped it into her handbag, and set out for his home. The fields around her seemed unusually quiet, the sky heavy with pale grey clouds. With each step, she felt the weight of time pulling her into a story larger than she expected. Professor Whitcomb welcomed her warmly, though surprise flickered across his eyes at the sight of the diary. "Miss Marple, where did you find this?" "Delivered to me this morning, a family trunk," she explained, and the professor listened with growing intensity. He opened the diary carefully, examining the markings. These symbols, they resemble a field cipher used by British intelligence officers. Rare, very rare. He paused. Captain Whitlock was not listed among intelligence units, but these markings suggest he may have been involved in espionage. Miss Marple felt her pulse quicken, not from excitement, but from the quiet thrill of discovery. Professor Whitcomb added, "If these notes are genuine, they could contain more information that changes our understanding of several battles." A flicker of unease crossed his face. "Miss Marple, you must be cautious. People still search for artifacts like these. The value is not only historical." She nodded slowly. "I noticed someone outside my house today, watching." The professor's expression darkened. "Then you are already involved more than you realize." By the time Miss Marple walked home, dusk had descended upon St. Mary Mead. The air carried that crisp stillness that comes before nightfall, and the lamps along the lane flickered one by one. Her thoughts swirled gently. The coded diary, the sealed envelope, the stranger watching her cottage. Had someone known the trunk would arrive today? Had someone been tracking it? As she reached her gate, she paused. A footprint clear in the soft earth lay beside her window. Large, fresh, recent. Miss Marple knelt slightly, studying it. Her gaze sharpened with a quiet certainty. "Whoever you are," she whispered, "you were here after I left." She pushed open her door, checked the trunk, everything untouched. Yet the room felt different, as if air had shifted. She closed the curtains calmly and sat in her chair, hands resting gently in her lap. Fear did not touch her. Miss Marple knew mysteries, and she knew people. Someone wanted something in that trunk. Something they believed dangerous or valuable. She poured tea, the warmth soothing her steady heart. "Well, Captain Whitlock," she murmured, "it seems I must discover what you were trying to hide." Night settled fully, deep and velvety, wrapping the cottage in silence. Miss Marple lit a candle and returned to the diary. The faint glow cast soft shadows across the ink, turning the pages into whispers from another world. She read an entry dated December 1st, 1805, written hours before Austerlitz. "If the truth is uncovered, it will protect the innocent. But if it falls into the wrong hands, history will judge us all harshly." Miss Marple touched the page gently. The captain had carried a burden deeper than battle. A secret, a warning, a plea. And now, 2 centuries later, the responsibility rested with her. She glanced at the sealed envelope once more, to be opened only by a truth seeker. Her breath softened. "I suppose that means me." Outside, a distant owl called. Inside, the candle flickered softly as the first threads of a vast mystery began to weave together. Miss Marple closed the diary with calm resolve. Tomorrow, she would open the envelope. Tomorrow, the investigation would truly begin. But for tonight, she allowed herself a quiet moment of reflection, knowing that the past had found her, and she would not let it down. Chapter 2. The Hidden Code in the Captain's Diary. Morning arrived softly in St. Mary Mead, with sunlight brushing gently across Miss Marple's cottage. Yet despite the calm beauty outside, her thoughts were still rooted in the previous night, the coded diary, the footprint by the window, and the sealed envelope marked to be opened only by a truth-seeker. She placed the envelope on her lap and breathed slowly. Her fingers hesitated, not out of fear, but because she sensed that once she opened it, she would step deeper into a mystery that had waited 200 years for her hands. At last, she broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet of yellowed paper, folded neatly. A faint scent of ink and old charcoal rose from it. When she unfolded it, she found no letter, only a series of strange symbols, arranged in lines, grouped like sentences, crescent shapes, tiny dots, slashes, and spirals. It resembled the markings she had seen in the diary. Miss Marple whispered, "A cipher." But what kind? Along the bottom margin was a small note in faded handwriting. "If I fail to survive this war, these signs will reveal the truth. Seek one who understands the language of shadows." Miss Marple felt the weight of those words settle in her chest, a burden left behind by a man who had carried secrets through fire and battle. She wrapped the paper carefully and placed it inside the diary. Only one person she knew had the knowledge to help her, Professor Whitcomb. She prepared to visit him again, unaware that someone else had awakened early that morning, someone who had also seen the envelope's seal broken through the window. As she stepped outside, she felt a faint stirring in the air, like the past whispering her onward. Professor Whitcomb welcomed Miss Marple into his study with a gravity that suggested he had been waiting for her. Books lay open across his desk, maps unfurled, and a magnifying glass rested atop a stack of letters written in French. The professor pushed aside his papers. "Miss Marple, I've been thinking about that diary. I couldn't sleep." His voice carried an uneasy energy. Miss Marple handed him the envelope's page. He studied the symbols silently for several minutes, his brow furrowing deeper with each passing second. Then he exhaled sharply. "This is not common military code," he said. "This is espionage ciphering, used only by certain intelligence officers during the Napoleonic Wars." He pulled a dusty reference book from a shelf and opened it to a diagram of coded markings. "See here, the spirals represent false troop movements. The crescents stand for diversion plans, and these dots, these usually mark the presence of an informant." Miss Marple felt a shiver, not of fear, but of realization. So Captain Whitlock was. The professor nodded slowly. Yes, he was likely acting as a covert intelligence officer, and judging by these markings, he may have been involved in a high-risk mission before the Battle of Ostend. He paused, eyes drifting toward the window as if seeing the past. Napoleon's forces were brilliant at misdirection, but the British intelligence system was not without its own tricks. It is possible Captain Whitlock was part of an operation that has never been recorded in official history. Miss Marple's voice softened, and now someone in the present wants these secrets. The professor looked at her sharply. "You said a man was watching your cottage." "Yes, then you must take great care. Information from this diary could alter historical understanding, or be exploited." The concern in his voice felt genuine, and Miss Marple sensed his fear came not from danger, but from respect for the weight of history. She thanked him and prepared to leave. But before she stepped out, the professor spoke again, more quietly. "Miss Marple, If the coded pages refer to Austerlitz, you must know many soldiers died carrying messages that never reached their destination. Someone may still resent the truth those messages contain. The morning air felt colder as she stepped out into the world again. Back home, Miss Marple settled into her favorite chair, the diary open across her knees. She turned to a page with heavy, penciled markings, one that Professor Whitcomb had described as critical. December 1st, 1805. The frost sharpens tonight. Tomorrow we march toward the fields chosen by fate. But there is something amiss. As she read, the words seemed to melt into imagery, pulling her gently into the past. Cold wind swept across an open field near Oslo. The French campfires glowed like scattered stars against the frozen earth. Captain Whitlock, wrapped in a thick military coat, rode through the night with a sealed packet under his uniform. Snow crunched beneath horse hooves. Soldiers whispered. The air trembled with anticipation of bloodshed, yet Captain Whitlock's face showed a different kind of fear. He was not afraid of death. He was afraid of failing to deliver a message that could change the tide of battle. Miss Marple felt his tension as if standing beside him. The imagery was vivid, not dramatic, but deeply human, men carrying burdens heavier than weapons. Then she saw him enter a dim tent where another officer waited, the two men speaking in hushed urgency. One pointed angrily at a map, the other clutching the coded sheet, now lying in Miss Marple's own lap. Suddenly, the memory dissolved, as if carried away by winter wind. Miss Marple blinked back into her cottage, heart steady but stirred. Something was wrong at Austerlitz, she whispered, and the diary holds the key. But before she could turn another page, she noticed movement outside. Someone was approaching her gate again. A soft knock sounded at the door. Miss Marple opened it to find the same man she had glimpsed the day before. He was tall, with tired eyes and a coat that appeared too heavy for the mild weather. "Good afternoon, Miss Marple," he said with forced politeness. "My name is Mr. Larkin. I believe you received a trunk yesterday." Her expression remained calm, almost kindly. "So I did. May I ask how you know of it?" He hesitated, a detail she noticed immediately. "I was acquainted with the Whitlock family. The trunk contains items of value to historical research. I believe it would be safer in my hands." Miss Marple studied him with gentle precision. He avoided her gaze when mentioning the trunk. His shoes carried dried mud, likely from standing under her window, and his voice trembled, not from fear, but from urgency. She replied softly, "I assure you, Mr. Larkin, the trunk is safe." He inhaled sharply, frustration flickering across his features. "Miss Marple, you must understand. Some truths should remain buried." Miss Marple's heart did not waver. "Or perhaps," she said, "some truths must finally come to light." He stared at her for a long moment, then stepped back. "This isn't over," he muttered before leaving. As he walked away, Miss Marple knew one thing with certainty. Mr. Larkin was not searching for history. He was running from it. The rest of the afternoon passed in silence, broken only by the soft turning of diary pages. Miss Marple read until the words blurred into the glow of evening. Captain Whitlock's entries grew heavier, the coded markings more frequent. Each sentence carried weight, the burden of a man who had seen too much and understood too deeply the cost of truth. As Miss Marple closed the diary for the night, her heart felt both moved and anchored. The trunk did not simply contain artifacts. It contained a story that someone still feared, a story that had outlived nations, battles, and generations. She placed her hand gently over the diary. "Whatever happens," she whispered, I owe Captain Whitlock the truth he sought to protect. Beyond her window, the wind rustled softly, as if carrying faint echoes of drums and distant commands from 1805. Miss Marple did not fear the path ahead. She simply prepared herself for what tomorrow would reveal. Chapter 3. Memories Frozen in Russia 1812. Miss Marple slept lightly that night, her mind still tangled with thoughts of Captain Whitlock, the coded diary, and the unsettling visit from Mr. Larkin. The cottage was quiet, but not comfortingly so. There was a tension in the silence, like the world was holding its breath. When the soft light of dawn seeped in, she rose, wrapped herself in a warm shawl, and sat beside the trunk. Each object inside seemed to carry its own weight, its own memory. She lifted the diary again and traced the markings with calm fingers. A small line of ink caught her attention, one she had overlooked earlier. If Austerlitz was a fire, Russia was an endless winter that swallowed truth and men alike. Miss Marple exhaled slowly. Russia, 1812. Napoleon's most disastrous campaign. She turned the page. The ink changed, heavier, slightly smudged, as if written with trembling hands. December 1812. The cold cuts deeper than any sword. I fear we will not all see England again, and yet the secret I carry grows heavier. Miss Marple felt the room cool as she read. It wasn't her imagination. It was the story pulling her into another world, a world of ice, hunger, and buried secrets. As Miss Marple continued reading, the words dissolved into vivid memory. Before her mind's eye, the vast frozen plains of Russia appeared endless, white, merciless. The wind howled across the abandoned roads, where Napoleon's retreating army staggered like shadows. Captain Whitlock trudged through thick snow, his breath forming clouds that vanished instantly in the frigid air. His face was gaunt, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Around him, men murmured prayers, curses, names of loved ones, voices swallowed quickly by the wind. Miss Marple could almost smell the burning wood of desperate campfires, could almost feel the sting of frost on her own skin. The diary described it softly. Many fell, not from bullets, but from cold that claimed them like a silent enemy. We shared what warmth we could, but it was never enough. Captain Whitlock travelled with a small group of British officers embedded within the Allied forces. Their mission had been intelligence gathering, but now it had become survival. Yet, amidst the cold and suffering, something else haunted the captain, a secret one he had carried since Austerlitz. Miss Marple sensed his fear rising through the pages. He was not only running from winter, he was running from someone within his own ranks. Miss Marple turned to a diary page where a peculiar sketch appeared, a curved symbol resembling a half-moon intersected by a straight line. She had noticed the symbol carved faintly inside the trunk, but hadn't understood its meaning. Here, in the diary, the captain wrote, "Tonight I saw the mark again, burned into a tree beside our camp. It means the traitor is near." Miss Marple leaned in, her expression sharpening. A traitor, within the intelligence unit. Someone who followed Captain Whitlock through France and into Russia. The scene shifted again in her mind. Captain Whitlock knelt beside a dying fire, his gloved hands trembling. Snowflakes drifted onto his uniform as he stared at a nearby tree where the symbol had been carved crudely into the bark. Another officer approached Major Harrington, the man rumoured to be unwavering, loyal, almost painfully righteous. But the captain's diary described something different. Harrington's calm disturbs me. He asks too many questions, watches too closely. I fear he knows I carry more than simple letters. Miss Marple felt the tension deepen. The cold of Russia was real, But the coldness within the unit, the suspicion, the secrecy, was far more dangerous. Captain Whitlock wrote of coded messages he had hidden within his cloak. Messages meant for British command. Messages that revealed Napoleon's weakening supply lines and internal fractures among his marshals. These messages were priceless. Enough to change battles, enough to destroy the man carrying them if discovered. And now, someone marked with that crescent symbol wanted them. Miss Marple pressed her fingertips together. "Mr. Larkin knows more than he's saying," she whispered, "and he fears these secrets for a reason." The next diary entry was darker, written with uneven strokes. December 15th. The storm struck without warning. Men collapsed like falling branches. Harrington vanished for hours, returned with a strange calm. Miss Marple felt her pulse quicken. She imagined the storm, winds whipping, snow blinding, soldiers pressing forward with numb limbs. In these conditions, trust was fragile. One wrong move could doom them all. The flashback deepened. Captain Whitlock and Harrington walked side by side through the blizzard, their breaths forming clouds of frost. Harrington spoke with unsettling softness. "You carry something valuable, Charles. You can tell me, you know." Captain Whitlock stiffened. "I carry only what every man here carries, the hope of reaching home alive." Harrington smiled faintly, not warmly. "If that were true, you would not keep that diary so close." Whitlock's hand instinctively touched his coat where the diary rested. Miss Marple felt the dread in that moment. The cold was outside, yes, but the real danger walked beside him. Later that night, the captain wrote, "I saw him slip into my tent. He touched the diary, but did not open it. Why? What is he waiting for?" Miss Marple recognized the pattern, not of a villain, but of a man torn between duty and desperation. "Harrington wasn't evil," she murmured softly. "He was frightened. He believed the wrong thing was the right thing." This, she knew from a lifetime of observing people, was often how tragedy began. Miss Marple closed the diary for a moment, letting her breath settle. The memories of Russia, the cold, the fear, the flickering warmth of loyalty and betrayal clung to her like a thin layer of frost. She stood and walked quietly to the trunk. Her fingers traced the faint crescent symbol carved inside the lid. She knew with certainty now that the symbol was not random. It marked those who sought the coded messages. Those who believed Captain Whitlock possessed more than mere intelligence. Perhaps Harrington had died long ago, but the symbol, the organization behind it, the fear it caused, those things, she suspected, had survived the centuries. A soft knock rattled her window. Miss Marple turned sharply. Outside, pressed against the glass, was a folded slip of paper. No footsteps, no shadow, only a note left silently during her reading. She opened the window cautiously and retrieved it. On the paper was a drawing, the same crescent symbol, and beneath it a message written in trembling ink. "Stop reading the diary." Miss Marple's heart remained steady, but her eyes hardened with resolve. The past was no longer whispering. It was warning, and she had never once turned away from the truth. She placed the diary gently on her lap. "Captain Whitlock," she whispered, "whatever you faced in the snows of Russia, I will face here." Her cottage seemed suddenly colder, the air thick with the weight of history and hidden fear. But missmarple.com, uncertain, lit her lamp and prepared for the next chapter. The chapter where secrets began to unravel. Chapter 4. The letter Napoleon never wanted found. Morning sunlight filtered through Miss Marple's curtains, soft but uneasy, as if the sky itself sensed the weight of the message left on her window. "Stop reading the diary." Miss Marple sat at her table, the diary open before her, Yet she did not turn a page. Instead, she held the sealed envelope she had originally found inside the trunk, the one she had assumed contained a coded sheet. But now, running her fingers along its edges, she noticed something she had missed the first time: a second layer of paper hidden within the lining. Carefully, she peeled the inner paper away from the envelope's old glue. A small folded parchment slipped out, thinner, older, more delicate than the coded sheet. When she unfolded it, her breath caught. It was a fragment of a letter, written in French, the handwriting sharp and precise. Miss Marple recognized the style instantly. She had seen such handwriting in historical exhibits, museums, and countless books. It resembled Napoleon's own script. Her heart tightened, not in fear, but in the exhilaration of uncovering something forgotten by the world. She translated slowly. The movements must remain concealed until the appointed day. To reveal them would be to invite disaster. The battalion at the eastern ridge must not be informed. The fragment ended abruptly, torn. Miss Marple's fingers trembled slightly. Napoleon was instructing someone to keep information hidden, and that missing information had likely altered the fate of hundreds of soldiers. Why would Captain Whitlock have this letter? And why had someone tried so hard to hide it? The truth pressed close, urgent and cold, like the Russian winter still lingering in her thoughts. She folded the fragment gently and placed it beside the diary. Someone had left her a warning, but someone else, Captain Whitlock himself, had left her the truth, and she knew which voice she would follow. Concerned but resolved, Miss Marple travelled to the nearest historical archive, a quiet stone building whose interior smelled of dust and wisdom. She requested access to early 19th century correspondence records. A young archivist named Clara assisted her. Clara, gentle and curious, handled the old papers with reverence. Miss Marple showed her the fragment without revealing its origin. Clara's eyes widened. This handwriting, it looks remarkably similar to Napoleon's. Her voice rose in excitement. But I've never seen this text before. It's not part of any known letter. Miss Marple nodded. It appears incomplete. Clara examined it more closely. The reference to the battalion at the eastern ridge, that could be Austerlitz. Napoleon positioned hidden units across the ridges, and according to history, Miss Marple added quietly, one battalion was never warned about a trap. Clara looked at her sharply. You think this letter explains why? I think it may reveal a mistake, Miss Marple said, choosing her words carefully, or a deliberate act. Clara hesitated, then whispered, if this truly came from Napoleon's circle, people might still feel protective about what it reveals. Miss Marple felt the subtle tremor beneath those words, the same tremor she had sensed in Mr. Larkin's eyes. Clara returned the fragment gently. Wherever you found this, you must be cautious. Miss Marple smiled softly. My dear, I always am. But even she could feel the threads tightening. History was shifting, and she was standing at the center of the unraveling. When Miss Marple returned home, she placed the fragments beside the diary and opened to the next entry. Immediately, the words pulled her into another memory, this one sharper, brighter, filled with the intensity of political fire rather than the cold of Russia. The flashback formed before her, a dimly lit chamber in the Tuileries Palace. Napoleon sat at a narrow wooden desk, maps spread before him. The room flickered with candlelight, illuminating his stern profile. Two of his most trusted officers stood by the door, tense, waiting. Napoleon dipped his quill into ink. His voice was low, clipped. No one outside this room must know of the diversion. Yes, sire, the officers replied. Especially not the battalion on the eastern ridge. If they advance too early, the entire strategy collapses. Miss Marple felt a chill. Napoleon continued writing rapidly, sealing the letter moments later. But as he handed it to a courier, another man stepped forward. A French intelligence officer whom Captain Whitlock would later recognize during the Russian retreat. He whispered, "Sire, the British have spies in the region. This message may fall into their hands." Napoleon's expression did not change. "Then let it be found, if it misleads them." That single sentence echoed in Miss Marple's mind. Napoleon may have planted false information intentionally, a strategy to deceive British intelligence. But if Captain Whitlock possessed the true version, and if someone altered the letter afterward, Miss Marple whispered, the truth was manipulated on both sides. The flashback dissolved, but the weight of what she had seen remained. Captain Whitlock had carried more than intelligence. He had carried the burden of a letter that could prove Napoleon orchestrated a betrayal, or that someone else did, and that burden travelled with him from Austerlitz to Russia, and ultimately into the trunk that arrived in Miss Marple's cottage. Returning to the diary, Miss Marple found an entry written with hurried strokes. "The letter fragment is not safe. I fear Harrington knows more than he admits. The missing page contains the truth, not about Napoleon, but about us." Miss Marple felt a sharp pulse of understanding. The missing page wasn't about Napoleon. It was about the British battalion, and perhaps a betrayal from within. Her fingertips lingered on the words, absorbing the emotion beneath them. Captain Whitlock's writing carried guilt, fear, and a desperate wish for justice long after his own time had ended. Someone had taken the missing page. Someone who feared what it revealed. Maybe Harrington, or maybe someone linked to him. Her thoughts turned again to Mr. Larkin. He had said, some truths should remain buried. Why? Whose family legacy did he protect? Miss Marple stood and moved to the trunk, searching again. Beneath the uniform's inner lining, she felt stitching slightly thicker in one section. She carefully opened it. Nothing inside, but the lining had clearly once held something, a folded sheet, a hidden page. Someone had removed it, and she had a suspicion who. Evening arrived slowly, casting warm orange light across Miss Marple's cottage, but the warmth did not reach the unease in her heart. She sat beside the diary, absorbing the fragments of truth she had uncovered. Napoleon wrote a letter that could change historical understanding. Captain Whitlock carried pieces of that letter. A British officer, Harrington, may have stolen the missing page. Mr. Larkin, a descendant perhaps, now wished the truth to remain hidden. Miss Marple closed her eyes briefly. Human motives were rarely simple. Even during war, men acted from fear, love, honor, guilt. She whispered, Captain Whitlock was not only trying to reveal a secret, he was trying to protect someone, and now she understood. The diary was not just an account of war. It was a plea, a final, desperate attempt to correct a wrong that history recorded unfairly. Miss Marple placed her hand over the diary, her voice soft yet unwavering. I will not let your truth be silenced. Outside, the wind carried a faint echo, not of Russia's winter or France's battlefield, but of history calling out through time. Miss Marple felt the weight of the task ahead, but she also felt clarity, a certainty that she would uncover the missing page, the truth and the legacy buried in the shadows. And tomorrow she would begin with the one man who feared the truth most, Mr. Larkin. Chapter 5. The Shadow of a British Spy. The next morning dawned unusually still in St. Mary Mead. The birds were quieter, the air heavier, and Miss Marple sensed that the village's calm surface had begun to ripple beneath the touch of old secrets. She sat with her tea, the diary open in front of her. The fragment of Napoleon's letter lay to the side, its slanted French script seeming to watch her. Yet Miss Marple's thoughts were not on the Emperor. They were on Mr. Larkin. If Harrington, the officer who shadowed Captain Whitlock, had stolen the missing page, then someone in the present day was guarding that family legacy, and Mr. Larkin's desperation was too strong to ignore. But Miss Marple believed in observing people, not confronting them blindly. So she prepared herself not for an accusation, but for a study of behavior, of tone, of a man shaped by inherited secrecy. She folded the diary inside a cloth and placed it gently in her handbag. Before leaving the cottage, she whispered toward the trunk, as though speaking to the long-lost captain. "I will not fail you." Outside, the morning fog clung low to the ground. The village lanes were empty as Miss Marple made her way toward Professor Whitcomb's home. She needed context, not only about Napoleon's deception, but about British espionage, especially the kind that could leave shadows stretching across centuries. Her heart remained steady, yet a faint sadness lingered beneath her calm exterior. Sadness for the lives lost in winter fields, and for the truths buried under generations of silence. Professor Whitcomb greeted Miss Marple with visible relief. "I'm glad you've come," he said, ushering her inside. "I've been thinking all night about the man in Russia, the one Captain Whitlock feared." Miss Marple sat down gently. "I believe Harrington may be at the center of this mystery, and perhaps Mr. Larkin's connection lies there." The professor nodded. "It's possible Harrington came from a well-known military family. Some members later served in intelligence work. There are documents about them in the old Harrington estate." Miss Marple's eyebrows lifted. "The estate still stands?" "Yes," he replied, "though abandoned for years. It's a long walk, but not inaccessible." Miss Marple's mind sharpened. If Harrington removed the missing page, perhaps he hid more than one truth. Artifacts, letters, sketches, any one of them could reveal the true story behind Captain Whitlock's burden. The professor hesitated. "I shouldn't encourage trespassing, but you have a way of uncovering truths, Miss Marple." She smiled softly. "I'm merely observant, Professor." Together, they traveled a short distance to the Harrington estate, a crumbling manor partially overtaken by ivy and silence. The air felt old, thick with memory. Inside, dust coated everything like pale snow. The professor guided her toward a study filled with toppled shelves and scattered papers. Among them lay a sketchbook, its cover brittle with age. Miss Marple opened it gently. Inside were pencil drawings, not of landscapes, but of battle scenes, spy signals, and coded symbols. She froze at the sight of one page, a crescent intersected by a straight line, the same mark carved inside Captain Whitlock's trunk, the same mark left on her window in a warning. Miss Marple whispered, "Harrington belonged to a covert signal group." The professor nodded gravely. "And maybe Mr. Larkin is his descendant, inheriting not pride, but guilt." Near the last page, they found a drawing that changed everything. Harrington approaching a tent in Russia, his hand inside his coat, his expression tortured. Below it, written faintly, "Forgive me." Miss Marple felt the ache of human conflict, the kind where duty and conscience collide so violently that no one comes out whole. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple examined the sketchbook for hours. The more she studied it, the more she sensed Harrington's turmoil. He was no villain. He was a man torn between orders and truth, loyalty and compassion. Turning to the diary again, she found Captain Whitlock's reflection on the same man. "Harrington watches with cold eyes, but I see beneath the frost." He is afraid, not of death, but of the truth finding him. Miss Marple touched the words gently. In her long life, she had seen many types of guilt, the kind that hardened men, the kind that made them run, and the kind that guided descendants to protect shadows instead of facing light. She believed Harrington had taken the missing page to shield someone, maybe even Captain Whitlock himself, or civilians caught in the conflict. But someone now feared that page surfacing, someone like Mr. Larkin. As she sat with the diary, the room dimmed around her. The flickering lamplight cast shadows across the pages, almost shaping the forms of soldiers in distant snowfields. Then she noticed a note scribbled faintly in the diary margin. "If I fall, the truth rests with the lantern in the east." Miss Marple paused. A lantern, a symbol, or a place? She recalled the Manor sketchbook. The crescent symbol was often drawn beside rough outlines of lanterns. Her mind clicked softly. "This is not a place," she whispered. "It's a signal, and someone in the present might still be using it." That evening, Miss Marple found Mr. Larkin standing outside her gate once again. But this time, his shoulders sagged, his expression defeated rather than demanding. "Miss Marple, may we speak?" She nodded and motioned him inside. He entered hesitantly, as if stepping into a memory he feared. Miss Marple offered him tea, and he accepted with trembling hands. "I am not your enemy," he whispered. I only wanted to protect my family." Miss Marple remained silent, letting him unburden himself. "My great-great-grandfather was Major Harrington. There were stories in our family, stories of shame, secrecy, betrayal." His voice cracked. He never forgave himself. Miss Marple's gaze softened. "You feared the truth would harm your family's reputation." He nodded. "But I see now. Hiding the truth has only deepened the wound." Miss Marple leaned forward. "What do you know of the missing page?" Mr. Larkin hesitated, then removed a small tin box from his coat. His hands shook as he opened it. Inside lay a folded, fragile sheet of paper. "My family kept this hidden for generations," he whispered. I brought it here today because something told me you were the only one who would understand." Miss Marple's breath steadied, her heart both heavy and compassionate. For centuries, a man's guilt had travelled down a family line. Now, at last, it had reached the light. Miss Marple unfolded the missing page gently. Captain Whitlock's handwriting flowed across it with urgency and sorrow. Harrington acted not from treachery, but to protect the civilians caught between the lines. He misled our informants intentionally, not to betray us, but to save lives. History will condemn him, yet it is I who asked him to do it. Miss Marple felt the ache of truth pierce the silence. Captain Whitlock had taken the blame upon himself, and Harrington had carried the guilt of a noble act misunderstood by the world. Miss Marple closed her eyes, absorbing the weight of their choices, the cold of Russia, the burden of secrets. When she opened her eyes, she saw Mr. Larkin watching her with fear and hope intertwined. "Your ancestor," she said softly, "was not a traitor. He was a man of conscience." Tears filled Mr. Larkin's eyes, and Miss Marple knew, with quiet certainty, that a new chapter of healing had begun, not only for Mr. Larkin, but for history itself. But the mystery was far from over, because now that she held the missing page, there was one final question. Who else knew of its power? And why had someone tried to stop her from discovering it? Chapter 6. The Map That Shouldn't Exist. The evening after Mr. Larkin's confession settled into St. Mary Mead with heavy clouds and an uneasy calm. Miss Marple sat in her living room, the diary, the missing page, and Napoleon's torn letter placed neatly before her. The lamplight flickered gently, casting soft shadows across the wooden floor. Yet her attention drifted toward another object from the trunk, the torn battlefield map. It had remained ignored amidst the urgency of the diary, but tonight something tugged at her intuition. She lifted the fragile map and unfolded it carefully. The paper crackled softly, like thin ice beneath a cautious step. The map depicted troop positions, French units marked in blue, British intelligence paths in faint pencil. But as Miss Marple held it closer to the lamplight, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. Faint pencil markings, almost invisible unless the page was tilted at the right angle. Lines, arrows, circles, not drawn by Napoleon, not printed by any official cartographer. These markings were Captain Whitlock's. Her breath tightened as she traced one arrow leading toward a ridge mentioned in Napoleon's letter fragment. A small note sat beside it. If they advance too soon, they walk into death. Miss Marple closed her eyes for a moment. The gravity of Captain Whitlock's burden pressed against her heart again. The war he fought was not only on snow-covered fields, but inside his conscience. She opened her eyes again and whispered, "This map. It tells a different story. A story hidden for generations. A story someone still feared becoming known." Early the next morning, Miss Marple visited Professor Whitcomb again. He greeted her with a mix of worry and curiosity. When she spread the map on his crowded desk, his eyes widened behind his spectacles. "My word," he breathed. "This is not a standard military map." He angled a lamp above it and tilted the page. The faint markings glimmered into view. These pencil lines, they predict Napoleon's faint maneuver at Austerlitz before it happened. Miss Marple's gaze sharpened. Captain Whitlock foresaw the trap. The professor nodded slowly, awe creeping into his voice. For a British intelligence officer to understand Napoleon's intentions at this level, it's extraordinary. It suggests he had insight no one else possessed. He leaned closer, tracing a small circle drawn near a forested area. And here, this symbol indicates an ambush point never recorded in British accounts. If Captain Whitlock knew of it, he may have prevented a massacre. Miss Marple's heart tightened with a mix of sorrow and admiration. Then the professor frowned. But this, he tapped the map gently, would have been considered highly classified, impossible for a mere captain to access. Unless, Miss Marple finished softly, unless someone shared the information with him. The professor looked at her gravely. Yes, someone within the French inner circle. A silence settled between them, thick and unsettling. Captain Whitlock had not only carried intelligence, he had carried a secret connection, one that could rewrite the understanding of the Napoleonic Wars. And Miss Marple sensed that the map's existence threatened someone even now. Professor Whitcomb sighed. "You must be cautious. This is no longer simply a personal history. It is a political and historical revelation." But Miss Marple only nodded calmly. Truth, like daybreak, always touched the world eventually. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple returned home and laid the map beside the diary. She turned to a new entry, dated years after Russia, an entry written with calmer, steadier hand. Junho 17, 1815, on the eve of Waterloo. The winds smell of rain. I feel history gathering itself, preparing to tremble. Miss Marple read on, and the words around her faded. Another flashback took shape, this time not the frozen misery of Russia, but the charged anticipation of the battle that would finally defeat Napoleon. A storm raged across muddy fields, lightning slicing the sky. Captain Whitlock stood beneath a soaked tent canvas, his uniform heavy with rain. Behind him, soldiers murmured and prepared for the coming battle. He unfolded a map, the very same torn map Miss Marple now possessed, and studied it under a dim lantern. Another officer approached quietly. It was Harrington. The flashback sharpened as Whitlock spoke softly, barely audible beneath the storm. If the intelligence is correct, Napoleon will strike the ridge just before dawn. Harrington swallowed, tension carved into his face. Then we must warn them. Whitlock's voice broke slightly. We cannot. Our orders forbid us from intervening. The torment in both men was palpable, the torment of loyalty clashing with conscience. Harrington touched the map with shaking fingers. If we say nothing, they die. Whitlock looked at him, eyes filled with a grief deeper than any battlefield wound. And if we speak, we betray everything our command stands for. The storm rumbled like a warning from the heavens. Miss Marple felt her chest tighten. Two men, trapped between duty and humanity, forced to choose which truth mattered more. It was no wonder Harrington had carried shame for generations, and no wonder Captain Whitlock's diary felt like the cry of a man who had witnessed too much. The flashback dissolved softly, like rain fading from glass. As Miss Marple closed the diary, a sound snapped her back to the present, a soft creak outside her cottage. Someone was walking around her garden. She rose silently, peered through the curtains, and saw a shadowed figure near her window. When she opened the door, the figure stepped back quickly into the fog. "Who's there?" Miss Marple asked, gently, not afraid. The figure hesitated, then ran. Miss Marple noticed something glinting on the ground, left in the intruder's haste. She picked it up. A brass military button with an engraved crescent. The same crescent symbol from the trunk. The same symbol Harrington once carved into trees. The same symbol delivered as a warning. Miss Marple's eyes softened with understanding. Someone else carried Harrington's legacy. Someone who had not come to confess or seek truth, but to silence it. The fog thickened around her, but Miss Marple did not feel fear. She felt determination settle deep within her chest. "Your message is clear," she whispered into the evening air. "But the truth will not stay buried." She returned inside, the map still glowing faintly under her lamp. The shadows outside knew what she had found. But shadow did not frighten her. Truth always outlived fear. Late into the night, Miss Marple studied the faint pencil marks again. She traced the arrows with thoughtful fingers. Then she noticed something astonishing. The markings not only predicted Napoleon's planned maneuvers, they warned where British troops would suffer heavy losses. Captain Whitlock had been trying to send a message, not to ruin strategy, but to save lives. And the missing page Harrington kept hidden had revealed one final truth. They both acted out of conscience, not betrayal. Miss Marple whispered softly, her heart touched by the depth of their humanity. "You tried to save them, both of you." She placed the map, the diary, and the missing page together. Each piece belonged to a puzzle that had been buried, not out of malice, but out of shame and fear. But now the pieces were falling into place. Miss Marple leaned back, her eyes glowing with quiet resolve. Tomorrow she would confront not the shadows of the past, but the shadow living in the present. The one who ran from her garden tonight, the one who knew the map existed, the one who feared the truth more than history itself. Chapter 7. The Truth of the Lost Battalion. Miss Marple barely slept. The faint glow of dawn seeped through her curtains, but it did nothing to wash away the image of the shadowed figure running from her garden. Someone had been watching, waiting, perhaps even planning to take the diary and the map. Yet fear never ruled Miss Marple's heart. Concern, yes. Sadness, naturally, but fear. No. She rose early, wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders, and laid the diary on her desk. The missing page and the map rested beside it, forming a quiet but powerful triad of truth. But today she intended to seek one more piece. The final diary page, she suspected, was hidden within the uniform jacket. She unfolded the jacket again, running her fingers along the seams. And there, near the inner collar, she felt a slight irregularity, a tiny hard ridge beneath the fabric. Her breath steadied. With careful precision, she used a small embroidery cutter to open the seam. A folded sheet slipped out, stained by age but intact. Another page, a confession sealed within cloth for 2 centuries. The handwriting was Captain Whitlock's, though shakier, as if written under emotional strain. If this reaches someone who seeks truth, let them know what happened on the night the battalion vanished. Let them know it was not cowardice nor betrayal. It was a choice, made to save those who could not save themselves. Miss Marple felt a deep ache bloom softly in her chest. The lost battalion, a subject of many speculations in war history, had carried a darker, more human story. She sat down, unfolding the page fully. They followed me because they trusted me, and I led them away from the ridge, not toward it. I knew Napoleon's trap. I could not let them walk into their graves. A moment of profound silence settled in the cottage. Captain Whitlock had defied orders. He had sacrificed his position, his honor, perhaps even his life, to save men from a brutal, unnecessary death. Miss Marple closed her eyes gently. So this is the truth you carried, the truth your descendants feared. But the pages held more, and she read on. Miss Marple's reading shifted into another vivid flashback, not as distant or frozen as Russia, but filled with tense breath and the smell of damp earth. The night before the battalion vanished, Captain Whitlock stood beside Harrington on a moonless slope. The men rested nearby, unaware that they stood between 2 impossible choices. Harrington whispered harshly, "If they stay here, they die with the dawn." Whitlock nodded, grief pressing deep into his sternum. "And if we lead them away, we are betraying our orders." "Orders," Harrington said bitterly, "are made by men who do not see the human cost." The 2 officers stood in silence, heavy with the burden only leaders know, the burden of lives held in shaking hands. Then Whitlock made his choice. "We go east," he said softly. Harrington's breath trembled, not with fear, but with something close to relief. "You understand what this means?" Whitlock nodded. Court-martial, disgrace, perhaps even execution. And yet he did not waver. At midnight, they awoke the battalion quietly. "Pack lightly," Whitlock whispered to the men. "We march east." No one questioned him, not because he was superior, but because he had earned their trust through every storm, every hunger, every cold night. The flashback softened as though tears blurred the edges. When the battalion disappeared into the forest, they believed they were following orders. Only Whitlock and Harrington knew the truth. They were saving them. Miss Marple felt each word as if it were breathing through the page, a confession written not to excuse, but to explain. By dawn, we were miles from the ridge. We heard cannon fire behind us, relentless, merciless. If we had remained, we would have been caught in the first wave. The diary page trembled faintly in Miss Marple's hands. Whitlock continued, "Some will say we abandoned our post, some will call us deserters. But if desertion is choosing life over senseless slaughter, then I accept the judgment." Miss Marple's throat tightened. War buried the real story. History, shaped by reports and official records, labeled the unit as lost, absent, unaccounted for. It never said why. It never honoured the choice that saved their lives. Miss Marple could almost see the battalion, weary, frostbitten, but alive, marching away in silence, unaware of how close they came to death. Harrington, who had carried guilt for generations, wrote only once in the margin. "We did what we had to do," Miss Marple whispered, "and you both paid for it." Outside, the wind brushed against her window, as if echoing the mournful relief of men who had been granted a second chance. And yet, there was one more line hidden at the bottom of the page. "If someone finds this, let them know someone followed us that night." Miss Marple felt her breath stop for a single beat. Someone followed them, and that someone's legacy was still alive. Miss Marple returned to the map, tracing the faint pencil line that skirted the tiny forest where Whitlock had led the battalion. There, in the margin, a smaller symbol she hadn't noticed before, not the crescent, a triangle. She searched the diary for any mention of it, and found a short, hurried line. "The triangle watches the crescent. They are not allies." Miss Marple's mind sharpened with clarity. There were two intelligence factions operating in secret, not one. One marked by the crescent Harrington's group. One marked by the triangle unknown, perhaps French, perhaps rogue, British. Captain Whitlock and Harrington had saved the battalion. But another group had pursued them silently, perhaps to erase the act or to capture intelligence. Miss Marple now understood something chilling. The figure in her garden, the one who fled, may not have been connected to Harrington at all. He might belong to the triangle. She felt no fear, only a deeper determination. She turned the diary page again. Captain Whitlock revealed his final realization. "The battalion reached safety, but I did not. The triangle found me. They took my letter, but not the truth." Miss Marple pressed a hand over her heart. Whitlock had died protecting the secret. Harrington had lived with the guilt. Their descendants now carried fragments of a story neither side fully understood. And now the truth rested in her hands. But she was no longer the only one looking for it. Miss Marple placed all the pieces, the diary, the missing page, the map, the sketchbook, together on her table. The light from her window fell gently across them, illuminating history's long-hidden heartbeat. She felt sorrow for Whitlock, compassion for Harrington, and something unexpected, empathy for Mr. Larkin, who had lived in the shadow of a misunderstood legacy. But she also felt a new presence, the unknown group, the triangle, still lurking in the present. She whispered softly, "This story cannot be buried again." The truth of the lost battalion was no longer a wound. It was a testament to courage, conscience, and the brutal moral complexity of war. She folded the map gently. Tomorrow, she would confront the final threat. Tomorrow, she would bring the truth to light, not only for the families, but for history. Yet tonight, in the warm silence of her cottage, Miss Marple allowed herself a rare moment of quiet emotion. She thought of Whitlock's steady hand guiding frightened men through darkness. She thought of Harrington's trembling confession written in sketches. And she thought of how truth, no matter how deeply hidden, always finds a seeker. Miss Marple whispered into the still air, "I will finish what you began." Outside, the wind sighed through the trees, not as warning, but as gratitude carried across time. Chapter 8. Confrontation at the Old Manor. The next morning arrived with a pale, unsettled light hanging low over St. Mary Mead. Miss Marple watched the slow haziness from her window as she wrapped a shawl around her shoulders. The night had been long, filled not with fear but with reflection, the truth of the lost battalion, the symbols of two shadowy intelligence groups, and the man who had stalked her garden under fog. She knew now that the truth could not remain within her cottage. It had to be brought into the open, not violently, not dramatically, but with clarity. There was only one place where such a confrontation could occur. The Harrington estate, abandoned, quiet, scarred by time. A place that held both the ghosts of past decisions and the legacy carried by Mr. Larkin. Miss Marple sent him a gentle letter. "I believe there is something you deserve to know. Please meet me at the Harrington estate this afternoon. Bring nothing, only honesty." She sealed the envelope with a calm hand. As she prepared the diary, the map, the missing page, and Harrington's sketchbook, a faint ache circled her heart. Not fear, but sorrow for lives burdened by secrecy. Captain Whitlock, Harrington, their families, even the men who vanished into history misunderstood. She touched the diary gently. "It is time," she whispered. "Truth," she believed, must never remain silent when it can heal. The Harrington estate loomed in the distance like a forgotten chapter. Ivy crawled along the stone walls, and the broken windows reflected shards of pale afternoon sunlight. The silence there was not empty, it was heavy, dense with memories. Miss Marple entered through the creaking doorway, her footsteps soft upon the dusty floorboards. The air smelled faintly of old leather and damp wood. She moved toward the study where she had once found Harrington's sketchbook. When she reached the room, she paused. Someone was already there. A figure stood by the window, rigid and tense, hands clasped behind his back. The outline was unmistakable. Mr. Larkin. But there was something different today. His shoulders slumped slightly, as though he had surrendered to the weight of the past. He turned when he heard her footsteps. "Miss Marple, I came because I couldn't carry this any longer." His voice shook, not with fear, but with relief. Miss Marple offered him a small, warm smile. "You have carried your ancestor's shadow long enough. Today we shall let the truth stand on its own." But before she could speak further, another sound drifted through the manor, soft, deliberate steps. Not hurried, not fearful. Someone else had arrived. Miss Marple's expression remained calm, but her mind sharpened. A man entered the study, tall, stern-faced, with sharp grey eyes. He did not appear surprised to see them. "I thought you might come here," he said quietly. Mr. Larkin stiffened. "You followed me." The stranger nodded once. "I've been following the diary, and her." He looked at Miss Marple. The triangle symbol glinted from the button on his coat. Miss Marple met his gaze without fear. "Then you must hear the truth as well," she said. The stranger stepped deeper into the room, the broken glass crunching softly under his boots. He studied Miss Marple with an intensity she had seen only in men who carried a lifetime of unspoken burdens. "You've uncovered things that should remain hidden," he said. Miss Marple shook her head gently. "Secrets buried in pain never stay buried without consequence." He frowned. "You don't understand. The triangle was formed to protect Britain's intelligence legacy. If your discoveries become public," Miss Marple raised a calm hand, "you fear reputation, not truth." Mr. Larkin flinched visibly, because those words held a mirror to his own struggle. Miss Marple stepped forward. "Captain Whitlock and Major Harrington made a terrible but compassionate decision. They saved the battalion at the cost of their honor. Your group feared that revealing this would show the fractures within intelligence history." The stranger's jaw tightened. "We cannot rewrite the Empire's narrative because of one man's guilt." "Guilt?" Miss Marple asked softly, "or conscience?" The man fell silent. Miss Marple opened the diary to the missing page and handed it to him. He hesitated before reading. As his eyes moved across the trembling handwriting, his expression slowly shifted from skepticism to confusion to something unexpectedly human. By the time he finished, his shoulders lowered, not in defeat but in understanding. Mr. Larkin stepped forward. "You see now," he whispered, "he wasn't a traitor." The stranger closed his eyes briefly. "No," he murmured, "he wasn't." And in that moment, the triangle's shadow softened. Miss Marple reached into the trunk and pulled out the torn map. Captain Whitlock tried to prevent a massacre. Harrington carried the guilt to his grave. And the truth you protect is not a betrayal. It is a profound act of humanity. Silence filled the room, not tense but cleansing. The study grew quiet as the weight of 200 years seemed to settle and then slowly lift. Mr. Larkin wiped his eyes, tears he had never allowed himself to shed. "For generations, my family believed Harrington ruined lives. We never knew he saved them." Miss Marple touched his hand gently. His courage was misunderstood, but not any longer. She turned to the stranger. "You followed this diary to protect a story that was never yours to guard. But now that you know the truth, what will you do?" He looked around the decaying room at the broken furniture, the falling wallpaper, the dust that covered legacies long forgotten. Then he spoke quietly. "We will correct the records. Privately at first. Historians will examine the documents, and Harrington's name will no longer be tarnished." Mr. Larkin breathed out a long, trembling sigh, the sigh of someone released from generations of inherited shame. But the man added, "The diary must be handled carefully. If mishandled, it could stir political controversies. There are people less understanding than I." Miss Marple nodded. "History deserves truth, not turmoil, and truth must be told gently, like handling a fragile flower." The stranger bowed his head in respect, something Miss Marple did not miss. For the first time, he was not an opponent, but a man humbled by truths larger than himself. As the afternoon light dimmed, Miss Marple gathered the diary, the map, and the missing page. She looked at both men, one burdened by inherited guilt, the other by institutional duty, and felt something soft settle within her heart. Compassion, understanding, and relief. She spoke gently. "Captain Whitlock and Major Harrington acted not as soldiers, but as human beings. Their choices were heavy but noble." Mr. Larkin nodded, tears falling freely now. "I will honor them properly." The stranger placed a hand over his brass triangle button and slowly unfastened it. "I will no longer follow these shadows," he said. "Some truths demand light, a symbolic gesture, the end of a lineage of secrecy." Miss Marple closed the diary for the final time that day. "Let their story breathe again," she whispered. They stepped out of the manor together. The evening sky glowed warmly, as if history itself had exhaled after centuries of tension. The truth was no longer trapped in old pages. It now lived in the open, in hearts willing to listen. Miss Marple looked up at the golden horizon, a gentle smile touching her face. "I believe," she said softly, "that Captain Whitlock would be at peace today." And for the first time in 200 years, the shadows surrounding the Harrington estate seemed to lift, replaced by quiet gratitude, carried softly on the evening wind. Chapter 9. Restoring a Soldier's Honor. The morning after the confrontation at the Harrington estate dawned bright and unexpectedly warm. Sunlight poured gently through Miss Marple's curtains, warming her small sitting room. It felt as though the world itself had sighed with relief, finally releasing the weight of 2 centuries of secrecy. Miss Marple sat by her window with a cup of tea, the diary and documents neatly arranged on the table before her. Today, she knew exactly what she needed to do, for Whitlock, for Harrington, for history, but also for Mr. Larkin, whose trembling shoulders and tearful eyes from the day before lingered in her memory. The truth had not broken him, It had freed him. Now the truth needed a home. She placed each item into a sturdy folder. Captain Whitlock's diary, the missing page, Napoleon's letter fragment, the annotated battlefield map, Harrington's sketchbook. These were no longer relics of personal pain. They were evidence of courage misinterpreted, humanity misunderstood, history misshaped. Miss Marple prepared her shawl, straightened her hat, and stepped out into the clear morning. Her heart felt light, but purposeful, calm waves beneath a rising sun. She was going to the London War Archives, and she was not going alone. Mr. Larkin met her at the village gate. His face still bore traces of sleeplessness, but his eyes were clear, as if finally aligned with truth instead of shadow. "Miss Marple," he said quietly, "I'm ready." She nodded kindly. "Then let us restore what time has stolen." The London War Archives stood tall and solemn, its stone facade carrying the weight of centuries. Inside, rows upon rows of documents whispered of forgotten battles, lost soldiers, and stories buried beneath official reports. A respected historian, Dr. Evelyn Montrose, greeted them. She was a composed woman with silver-streaked hair and curious, steady eyes. "How may I assist you?" she asked politely. Miss Marple opened the folder and laid the diary on the table with gentle reverence. "What we bring you," she said softly, "is a chapter of history that was misunderstood. And in its misunderstanding, 2 men carried burdens heavier than any musket." Dr. Montrose's eyebrows lifted. She looked at the aged diary, the brittle papers, the faded symbols. "Where did you find these?" "A family trunk," Miss Marple replied. "And a story that demanded to be heard." Dr. Montrose carefully examined the documents. As she flipped through the diary, her expression shifted, surprise, disbelief, then profound contemplation. She read silently, occasionally pressing a hand to her chest as Captain Whitlock's voice echoed across 200 years. "We saved them not through glory, but through disobedience born of conscience. Harrington followed me because he believed in life more than in orders. If ever the truth is found, let it absolve him." Dr. Montrose closed the diary slowly. This contradicts the official narrative." Miss Marple nodded gently. "It does, because history, like people, is often more complicated than it appears." Mr. Larkin stepped forward, voice steady but emotional. "My family condemned Harrington for generations, not knowing he saved lives. This diary must clear his name." Dr. Montrose's gaze softened. "And so it will," she said firmly. Then she opened the map. The faint pencil markings shimmered under the light. Her breath caught. "These are predictions of Napoleon's maneuvers." "Yes," Miss Marple said. "Predictions made not through espionage betrayal, but careful, compassionate reasoning." "Captain Whitlock saw patterns," Dr. Montrose murmured, "and acted to prevent slaughter." She leaned back, eyes bright with historical revelation. "This is remarkable. It will change the academic understanding of Austerlitz and Waterloo." Miss Marple folded her hands calmly, though pride glimmered beneath her serenity. Truth always changes understanding once given a chance. Dr. Montrose spent hours reviewing every page. She returned to Whitlock's entries again and again, as though hearing a forgotten voice speak directly to her. At last, she looked up, her eyes moist with emotion. "Your Captain Whitlock," she whispered, "was a man of rare courage. And Harrington, oh, how unjustly he suffered. This should never have been buried." Miss Marple nodded softly. "War is full of noise, Dr. Montrose. Sometimes the quietest truths are the hardest to hear." The historian exhaled deeply. "This diary, with the letter fragment, the sketchbook, Together, they paint a picture of two men choosing humanity over obedience. Mr. Larkin wiped his eyes silently. Dr. Montrose continued, "I must assemble a specialist panel, military historians, intelligence scholars. These documents will be authenticated, preserved, and eventually published." Miss Marple smiled gently. "That is all they deserve, the chance to speak again. And Harrington's reputation," Dr. Montrose added, "will be reviewed. Official records can be amended. Families can be notified." Mr. Larkin closed his eyes in relief. "My mother died thinking her ancestor was a traitor," he whispered. "If only she were alive to know the truth." Miss Marple placed a comforting hand on his arm. "She knows," she said softly. "Some truths reach the heart even when words never do." After leaving the archives, Miss Marple and Mr. Larkin walked along the Thames. The water shimmered in the afternoon sunlight, gentle waves lapping against the stone embankment. Mr. Larkin walked quietly, processing the weight that had finally lifted off his shoulders. "Miss Marple," he said at last, "why did you help me? You could have turned away. It was not your burden." She smiled with a softness that came from decades of watching human hearts reveal themselves. "Because truth matters. Because people deserve understanding, not judgment. And because your family carried pain that belonged not to shame, but to courage." He swallowed hard, voice barely audible. "I was taught to fear this story. Now I feel grateful." Miss Marple nodded. "Sometimes the stories we inherit are only shadows of the real ones. And shadows disappear when someone carries a lamp." They stopped at a bridge, watching the golden reflection of the sun ripple across the water. Mr. Larkin whispered, "You have given my family a gift we didn't know we needed." "No," Miss Marple said gently. "Captain Whitlock gave it. Harrington gave it. I merely helped you open the parcel." The wind carried a faint chill, but it felt refreshing, almost like a new beginning. That evening, back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat once more beside the trunk, but it felt lighter now, no longer burdened with hidden truths. It was a vessel of history, finally understood, finally heard. She placed fresh lavender inside it, a small symbolic gesture of peace. "Captain Whitlock," she whispered, "your truth is safe now." She imagined Harrington standing beside him, relieved at last from his century-old burden. Then she lit a single candle, its glow warm and steady, and whispered, "The lost battalion was never lost. They lived because two men chose humanity, and now the world will know." Outside, the night settled calmly over the village, not ominous, not watchful, but peaceful, almost grateful. Miss Marple leaned back in her chair, hands folded gently. Tomorrow would bring reflection. Tomorrow would bring closure. But tonight, for the first time since the trunk arrived, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a truth restored. The past, at long last, was at peace. Chapter 10. Miss Marple's Final Reflection. Sunlight touched St. Mary Mead with a soft golden glow, warming rooftops, hedges, and the narrow lanes that twisted through the village. Miss Marple awoke to a morning unlike any she had known in weeks. Light, peaceful, unburdened. The weight of secrecy that once hovered around her cottage had lifted completely. She prepared a gentle breakfast, then sat in her favorite armchair with a calmness that came only when one had completed something deeply meaningful. The trunk lay near the fireplace, closed now, but no longer mysterious or heavy. It felt like a story that had reached its rightful end. Miss Marple opened the window slightly. A breeze drifted in, cool, tender, almost like a quiet thank you whispered across time. Her mind wandered through everything that had happened. Mr. Larkin's transformation from fear to understanding, Dr. Montrose's promise to restore the historical record. The Triangle agent who laid down the burden of secrecy. Harrington's honor finally returned, and Captain Whitlock, the man who had never sought glory, only truth. Miss Marple folded her hands gently in her lap. Peace, she whispered. That is all he ever wanted. And today the world felt a little more peaceful because of it. By late morning, Miss Marple decided to take a slow walk to the village war memorial. She moved with the quiet dignity of someone carrying gratitude rather than worry. The path was lined with early spring flowers, soft purples, pale yellows, and small white blossoms swaying in the breeze. With every step, Miss Marple felt the intertwined lives of Captain Whitlock and Harrington walking beside her, their burdens finally eased. When she reached the memorial, she paused, reading the etched names of local soldiers who had served across generations. She placed a small bouquet of wildflowers at the base. "This is for all who carried pain silently," she murmured. A gentle emotion rose inside her, a blend of sorrow for the past and appreciation for the courage it had taken for two men to act against the brutal tide of war. She sat on a nearby bench, letting the wind brush softly across her face. The world seemed to hum with the quiet strength of those who had lived through conflict, not seeking recognition but holding on to compassion even when orders told them otherwise. Captain Whitlock and Harrington were among them. Later that afternoon, Miss Marple heard a gentle knock at her door. When she opened it, Mr. Larkin stood before her, dressed modestly but with a new steadiness in his posture. "I hope I'm not intruding," he said softly. "Not at all," Miss Marple smiled kindly. "Please come in." He entered, glancing briefly at the trunk near the fireplace, not with fear but with reverence. "I went to visit Harrington's grave this morning," he said. "For the first time, I felt proud rather than ashamed." Miss Marple's heart warmed. "That pride is well earned," she replied. Mr. Larkin exhaled shakily. "All my life, our family viewed Harrington as a man who failed in his duty. Now, I understand he chose humanity over orders. That changes everything." Miss Marple nodded. "Some acts are too deep to be understood immediately, but truth is patient and it finds its way eventually." He sat down, hands clasped. "Dr. Montrose has already begun preparing the documents for academic review," she says. "A correction to the historical record may be published within the year." "That will mean more than you realize," Miss Marple said gently. But Mr. Larkin shook his head lightly. "No, the true gift was what you did. You brought peace to two families, mine and Whitlock's descendants too." Miss Marple smiled, humbled. "I simply followed the clues Captain Whitlock left behind." Mr. Larkin hesitated, then placed something on her table, the brass triangle button he had found. "I don't need this anymore," he said. "That world of secrecy can end with me." Miss Marple touched the button lightly. A symbol once meant to intimidate now felt like a relic of a fading shadow. "You've chosen well," she said softly. After Mr. Larkin left, Miss Marple spent the evening tidying her small cottage. The rhythm of her movements was slow and thoughtful, each gesture deliberate, filled with the serenity of a chapter closing. She sat with the diary one last time, turning the pages with gentle reverence. Captain Whitlock's words, once filled with fear, guilt, and heavy conscience, now felt different. The meanings had shifted. The sorrow had softened into clarity. She read the final passage again. "If truth should ever find its way to gentle hands, let them judge us not by the rules of war, but by the hearts we carried into it." Miss Marple's eyes softened. "What gentle hands you hoped for," she whispered, "and how long they took to arrive." She looked around her quiet room, a small, warm sanctuary that had witnessed history unfold through old pages and fragile maps. She reflected on her role, not with pride, but with the simple understanding that every life, even the quiet ones, touches the world in ways unseen. She poured herself tea and gazed at the flickering candle beside her. "I wonder," she murmured, "how many truths rest quietly in attics, waiting for someone patient enough to listen." The flame danced softly, as if agreeing. Night fell gently over St. Mary Mead, casting soft shadows across Miss Marple's garden. She stepped outside for a final moment of reflection, the air cool but comforting. Stars shimmered above, distant, steady, eternal, the same stars that had watched over Whitlock during the march through Russia, the same stars that had witnessed Harrington's conflicted choices, the same stars under which men feared, hoped, fought, and forgave. Miss Marple breathed in the quiet night, letting the stillness wrap around her like a familiar shawl. She whispered into the breeze, "Your story is safe now." Inside the cottage, she gently closed the trunk. It no longer felt like a mystery. It was a story, completed, honored, freed. As she dimmed the lamp and prepared for sleep, a profound calm filled the room. Miss Marple knew that although she had solved many mysteries in her life, this one had been different. It had not revealed a crime, but a truth, not guilt, but humanity. And when she finally lay down, her heart felt light, carrying not the weight of the past, but the warmth of resolution. Far away, in the silent depths of history, the spirits of Captain Whitlock and Major Harrington seemed to rest easier, their names cleansed, their actions understood. And in St. Mary Mead, under a gentle moon, Miss Marple drifted into a peaceful sleep, the kind that only comes after doing something deeply, quietly right.